Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Negotiation. Obviously, the topic du jour around China is how the recently inaugurated Biden administration will approach China and vice versa. It's all anyone seems to want to talk about, so as faithful servants of our audience, we must abide. Occasionally. Don't get used to it. We've been inundated with questions about this, and rightly so, because of the wide impact the slightest of changes can make to the economic landscape of those whose businesses span the West and East. To that end, we brought in our hombre on the ground in China, the CEO of WPIC Marketing and Technologies, Mr. Jacob Cooke, to talk about inter-US-China relations under Biden, comment on the tariff war, speak to the technology race, and look ahead to what the next 4 years might bring, both in changes and status quo. Enjoy.
And it's not just one brand may choose one location for their supply chain now. You know, they might be using China, Vietnam, Indonesia, parts of India or Bangladesh, all around the world for different product lines. And those diversified supply chains are really sort of what the business consultants are recommending that their clients do right now. So you're not going to see all the eggs in one basket, I think, as you would have like 4 or 5 years ago. But, you know, a lot of that expertise that's being moved around to these other markets is still coming from China, because even up until 4 or 5 years ago, they were, for a lot of industries, the only show in town.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Jake, welcome back to the show. Good to have you back on, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
At a high level, what can we expect? What do you expect in the U.S.-China relations under President Biden?
You know, that's been really interesting. It's something, of course, a lot of people are talking about, but I'm not actually sure how relevant it is. You know, if you look at the media cycles over the last, let's say, 4.5 years, really before Trump came into power, you know, there's been a lot of rhetoric, but at the end of the day, the people on the ground are still trading at record numbers. You know, there's more exemptions getting put on these tariffs all the time, both ways, both into China and into the United States. So I don't expect there to be any major changes, because I believe that this administration has got to take care of a bunch of internal issues before they really focus on external issues. But at the same time, you know, if you go down a couple levels in government in terms of how the relationship is doing, the trade numbers are still growing, very solid. Lots of business being done, even without the travel, which is promising.
Yeah, that's true. So Biden, he's at least got, 3.5 years, 4 years. What do you think his top priorities will be, should be, with respect to China?
Well, I think what they've always said, at least if you're following their statements, is that they want a level playing field. They want, their rights to be protected better for their companies over here, which is pretty much the same that people have been saying for the last, more like 8 years. So I would suspect, a continuation of those policies. I don't expect any new tariffs. I don't expect this to be going in the wrong direction. If anything, we'll see things get lightened up like we've been seeing on the ground for a while. And then eventually, when there's some bandwidth over there, they'll focus on trade and increasing trade numbers like they normally do with every country around the world.
Speaking of the tariffs, I think it's fair to say that we have seen something akin to a tariff war a little bit over the last 4 years. And, I think you and I both agree that not all of that at least stemming from the U.S. side was unwarranted. There was a lot of stuff it was probably kind of about time that we took a hard look at some of the underlying under the hood features of what trade has been between the U.S. and China, because it's changed so fast. probably faster than administrative and some policies can keep up. So what do you think? Is it going to change? Are we going to see an end? Or is it everything going to be roses and rainbows? Or how do you see this tariff war kind of shaking out? Is it going to change or not?
I don't think there's going to be additional tariffs put on anything. And as I was mentioning before, you can apply for exemptions for your individual products. And we've been pretty lucky in the fact that we're getting those exemptions on imports into China about 75% of the time. And that could be due to any one of a number of reasons. Just a small component of the product being from China will usually get you exempted, or, being a food product, agriculture product. So from that point of view, we see the tariffs coming down, but maybe not from a policy point of view. I definitely do not think that tariffs are going up anytime in the near future. And I'm not so sure they had a ginormous effect either. I think what the whole point of this was the trade deficit to even it out and make it more in line. But now you've got basically export bans from the United States in certain technology, which is the stuff that China wants to buy. And low-end manufacturing that was moving out of China anyway, but in general, still Chinese-owned companies that are just now producing in Vietnam and Africa or in the Indian subcontinent.
How important is it then to really understand the legalities involved here? Like, you're talking about getting exemptions, and you guys are able to get exemptions 75% of the time for your clients. I mean, how much of this tariff war, this quote unquote tariff war, is really just understanding what it actually means and the steps that you need to take?
Most of it, to make a long answer short. And then so this is the thing too. I mean, not only that is nobody really knows when these things come into play haphazardly or very quickly, how they're going to be implemented. So again, it really comes down to how they're going to be interpreted on the ground, and how that's going to work. So, you don't know right away. You don't know necessarily when the policy comes out. It may be ambiguous, maybe for a reason. But it's not until you start to deal with it and try to figure it out and become experts and have the people around that know this area very well and that can adapt and move quickly. And then in general, if you were to look at, trade between the two countries month over month, you would have a hard time if you didn't know when those tariffs were implemented, to look at just the graphs and say, hey, yeah, it looks like the tariffs, there was the event that clearly changed everything. So like I said, trade is still up, and we're not anticipating anything to accelerate on the tariff front. So probably not a huge story for 2021.
I wanted to ask a question about how different sectors might be impacted. But if I'm going to be honest with myself, what I'm really thinking about is security and tech security, hardware security, things around 5G. Maybe not the tariff war in and of itself as an aggregated kind of nomenclature. Is there going to be any increase or decrease or something like this? But what if we look a little bit more particular and detailed at different sectors? What about technology in general? Could that sector be impacted?
I think that sector already has been the largest impacted. And it's now, when you look at global supply chains and protectionism, and it's really not just the US, China, it's kind of globally that we see this happening. When you look at technology, the supply chains are uber complicated. I think there's, not off the top of my head, but I think roughly 192 suppliers, something like that with an iPhone. So, I mean, and we saw this last year with breakdowns in certain parts. You're seeing it in automotive right now. And that's not due to any policy decisions, but when you have these ultra complex supply chains, only one little element needs to go down for you not to be able to make your product. There are automobile lines shut down right now in China and in other parts of the world as well, because they don't have the right chips to go into their cars. So, I mean, think of all the other parts that go into manufacturing automobiles, and they're shut down because they don't have the right chips. So this is naturally going to bring supply chains closer to manufacturing. And I don't think people are going to assume that shipping and supply chains and air freight and all of it is going to be as easy and as open as it was, pre-2019, basically. So that's going to change just anyway. There's going to be more homegrown tech all over the place, and manufacturing is going to be diversified. But I'm not so sure that was not in anybody's or against anyone's best interest, because China definitely was expressing interest in moving out of the low end manufacturing and up the value chain. And plenty of developing countries in Southeast Asia, African and Indian subcontinent do have great labor pools that are more suited for low end manufacturing that haven't seen the price inflation over the last 10 years.
You're right. Supply chains are uber complicated. And I think that the tariff war, at least what we were talking about, even on this podcast a few months ago, was what it was going to do to manufacturing. And as you alluded to, that you thought manufacturing might get closer to distribution or consumption even. What overall have you seen with regards to supply chain, manufacturing, distribution? How have those pieces on the board been moving around as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think we've seen a lot more in the textiles move to Vietnam. I think Vietnam is working up the value chain, from just, on the logistics side of our business from 5 years ago. I mean, the vast majority was very simple. It was kind of either China or the US or Europe. Now there's really a whole bunch of other companies. And it's not just one brand may choose one location for their supply chain now. They might be using China, Vietnam, Indonesia, parts of India or Bangladesh, all around the world for different product lines. And those diversified, supply chains are really sort of what the business consultants are recommending that their clients do right now. So you're not going to see all the eggs in one basket, I think, as you would have like 4 or 5 years ago. But, a lot of that expertise that's being moved around to these other markets is still coming from China, because even up until 4 or 5 years ago, they were, for a lot of industries, the only show in town.
When talking about the trade war, I've had some guests come on and say, listen, let's not lay all of this at Trump's feet or the Trump administration's feet. Let's also look at Xi Jinping and his government and what they've been doing and why they've been doing it, and try to find somewhere in the middle without going after the Trump administration altogether. What would you say to that?
Well, I think just the tone of your question implies that it wasn't planned. I mean, own up to it. This was the policies that they'd announced years ago. I mean, they do not have the labor pool anymore on the low end. And they announced probably 5 or 6 years that they really want to move up the value chain. And they've been implementing policies that have been doing that, as well as making really strong relationships with, other more developing countries in Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent, where they could actually push their production there too. This isn't a strategy that's unique to China. I mean, Japan did the same thing when their demographics were collapsing as well. They moved production to the United States and other places, which I believe they call desourcing, where they were getting their production centers closer to where their points of sale were. Germany's done it as well. So, it's not, again, it's from China's point of view, it's probably not a bad thing. I mean, it's probably more part of the plan. If anything, what Trump had done is sped it up. So I don't know if anybody over here is thinking that was, well, any blame is associated with it. I mean, they're probably thinking it's more of a success story than anything.
You mentioned Germany and Europe and some of the other countries. I know that WPIC works a lot with the West, with North America, but you see everything. You guys have, software systems that can measure everything from everywhere. Can you tell us a little bit? I think a lot of people would be interested to know, how has any of this impacted other nations like Europe and their relationship and their supply chain and logistics and commerce with China?
I think it really sort of depends on the size of the enterprise more than it does in the geographical location. So, I mean, if there's an issue with the United States, they're going to go after Apple and Boeing. You know what I mean? And then the other 700 or 800 companies that do business out here are really going to fly under the radar. If anything happened with Sweden, expect IKEA to get picked on, but really nobody else. So in Germany's situation, the companies that do business out here are quite massive. And they also are, in general, are the largest markets for those companies like Volkswagen, BMW. But it's been a great relationship because, they've transferred a lot of technology over here in terms of how to manufacture cars. This is now the largest by far car manufacturing source in the world. And you can see what's happening with electric vehicles. So, that has worked out pretty well. But in general, with the exception of Australia, you've never seen it really, any disputes, whether they've been, good relations or bad relations, really trickle down to the smaller importers. It's really kind of what can grab the headline. And, outside of Fortune 100, it's pretty hard to do that. So you'll see a lot of headlines, but when you look on the ground, very rarely has trade been interrupted. Or even to further on that, has it ever stopped growing?
You like to follow a lot of news. You like to follow a lot of tech. You like to follow a lot of business. You're just very, very well read across all sectors. I'm interested to know, because I feel like, and I've heard, and I've talked to a few people who have said, listen, the Belt and Road Initiative is really starting to show some cracks. Like, it's not crumbling, but it's really starting to show some cracks. Can you speak to what you know, what you're seeing, what you're experiencing about what's happening with the Belt and Road and how that's, how that's playing with the Uncle Xi's administration right now?
I think it's too early to tell. I think this was not a short-term plan. I think this was more of a 20-year plan. And to build up and diversify export markets outside of what was primarily the United States and parts of Europe. So cracks, I'm not sure. Again, I think that if you were to look at the data, the loans, the infrastructure projects, nothing's going down. Maybe some projects aren't going as well as expected, but again, that's probably expected too, based on where they were. I don't think that when people were making, investments to infrastructure in Balochistan, Pakistan, that they expected everything to go smoothly. And like I said, this is more of a 20-year plan than it is a 10-year plan. So probably too early to tell. But yeah, the strategy was to lend and build infrastructure in places that were super risky that the World Bank and IMF didn't want to go into. So, some of these, of course, there's going to be cost overruns. Of course, there's going to be delays. That shouldn't be surprising to anybody. So probably too early to say if there's actually cracks forming. From what we see, the infrastructure and certainly the initiative is still going forward, full steam ahead.
Well, that's good insight because, the media's job is to, the sky is falling at all times. So it's good to get more of a more tempered kind of a thought on that, and that nobody freak out, nothing, it's a long-term plan, ignore the minutia. So I like that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Let's go back and talk a little bit more about Biden administration because it's new and it's fresh and we're still wanting to see what's going to go on. Will U.S. businesses and U.S. consumers benefit under a Biden administration?
Oh, boy. That is a long question. And, I think it's really too early to tell. I really think it's too early to tell. At the end of the day, there's a lot being talked about and there's a lot of work to do. I'm not so sure. I think the consumer is definitely going to benefit because there's going to be a lot of stimulus. I think there's no doubt about that there's going to be a lot of liquidity pumped in the United States, in 2021. And that's certainly going to benefit the consumer. They've talked about this Buy in America plan. That's going to probably benefit U.S. businesses as well, but they're going to be limited. There really is only so much stuff that's bought in the United States or that produced in the United States, and we're still a very, very connected, global globe. Globalization is still very much in effect. So I don't know how much the Buy in America is really going to change from previous policies. So I don't know. At the end of the day, I probably would not expect there to be major differences in people's lives, cross-border trade, certainly in the first couple of years.
Well, and I think, would you agree that people in general, in my opinion, in my circles, are overreacting to a certain amount of expected change just because they were able to juxtapose Biden against Trump and say these are so completely different people, so they think. And they had such different
characterizations of who they were, at least in the media and to the public, that because they were so different, that the policies towards China must also be so different. And can you talk to me a little bit about how fallible that assumption is?
Very fallible. I think, and maybe it's just human nature, but I think every time an election cycle comes, people have really high expectations and end the cycle pretty disappointed. Everybody probably is able to juxtapose on Biden what they want to see or what they hope to see. But in general, the coalition that brought him to power is very fragmented, extremely fragmented. And a lot of them aren't going to get what they want out of this administration. I think that they're probably just going to do the best to play the middle. And when you do have so many different factions and micro or parts of the party that want different things, it's you're probably not going to leave with anybody happy. And maybe that is a success at the end of the day. So no, I don't think things are going to change. And I certainly don't think they're going to change quickly at all from what was going on previously. So the relationships probably do get closer. I think the one thing about Biden is that he's probably more open to joining multilateral trade agreements, which was something the previous administration absolutely would not do. So maybe TPP's back in play. Maybe they look at joining the RCEP, and that'll reduce some barriers, reduce some tariffs, reduce some taxes. But no, other than that, I don't think anything's going to change. And certainly if it does, not very quickly.
Well, thanks very much for your time. As we said off the top, we really just wanted to grab you and get some quick insights on some of what was going on with the Biden administration and the tariffs. But I want to end with a little bit more of a fun question, or maybe just some advice. I know that you love tech. You love to kind of watch things like cryptocurrency and battery technology and stuff. Can you talk to us about some of the fun things that you're seeing coming out of China? And I just know with like electric vehicles and stuff like that. What are some of the fun things that you're seeing that you're, enjoying paying attention to over there?
Well, certainly the convenience and delivery of all these various apps, online education and the boom there has been key, with all the schools being closed right now. What's actually really interesting that we're keeping a close eye on is the digital currencies that are getting deployed, which, are basically the complete and total opposite of Bitcoin. Creating a ledger that's going to be able to record, where the money's been before. So that's going to be really interesting in how that's going to affect society. Everything is already digital here in China, as you know, in terms of payments. Cash is basically obsolete. But with the blockchain technology and the digital currencies coming into play, it really might put an end to corruption almost completely. This might really be the answer to that. So we'll have to see how these get deployed, but they're starting to roll out in Beijing and Shanghai now. The Shenzhen test market, I believe that went okay. So we'll probably see these, faster and might make for, a more straightforward and honest society. So I think that's exciting probably for everybody.
Well, I think the last time we had you on the show, you were talking about the length of time that some of the money had stayed in your pocket, that the dye had actually bled into and stained your jeans. So obviously, we're not going to be seeing that happen to you anytime soon, nor anybody else over there.
I have no cash on me at all anymore. Haven't carried cash in weeks.
Jake, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time. Glad we could grab you again. Always look forward to your insights, and we'll be doing this again real soon.
Thanks, Todd. Great talking to you.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co. And be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。